There has been a murder. I am here to solemnly report that Death's Oath, the item many of us love to build around, is dead. Some want to rule it a suicide by a few bullets to the back of the head, but I am fairly certain I saw monster HP buffs leaving the scene of the crime holding a smoking gun. And although the bullets may have expedited Death's Oath demise, the autopsy revealed Death's Oath may have been being poisoned slowly over the past year. Let's go live to a reporter in the field with some statistical analysis of the deceased. Alright, let's break it down. How did Death's Oath die? I'm going to go over the key points of where Death's Oath basically got weaker and the rest of the game got stronger and harder. So to start off with, the final kind of nail in the coffin, one of the biggest changes that make Death's Oath really feel bad in the current game is they basically buffed a lot of boss encounters as well as monster HP across the board, in which case it's really important to have decent single target now, whereas previously you could have kind of a halvesy single target setup and you could still get through the content fine, even with sacrificing a 6-link chest piece to wear Death's Oath. Now, you have these huge monster HP bars, you really need some decent single target or the build's just going to feel terrible when you get to a boss. So that was to me was kind of the final nail in the coffin. The other nails in the coffin that's been building up over the year are things like they took basically all the chaos dot skills got massive increases in damage. So Death's Oath, if you don't know, is a 500 chaos damage per second dot, and it has a pretty gimped amount of supports you can use with it. So not only is it already gimped from the get-go, in which you can't use good supports to really maximize its damage, on top of that, you have all the other chaos dots got a big bonus on top of the fact they already could have good links, which basically means Death's Oath falls farther and farther behind being able to have a decent amount of damage when compared to just a normal chaos dot character. Then you have other things where they had this I forget when this was added, but they have things like modifiers to spell damage apply to skill damage over time for all the chaos dot skills, in which case if you want to set up a single target setup for your Death's Oath build, a lot of people used to use Telepathy with Blight, right? And that would be your single target setup. In order to scale Blight, one of the good ways to do that would be to invest into some spell damage. But when you're investing into spell damage, you're not investing into Death's Oath, which basically is an anti-synergy. So there's one anti-synergy there. Here's another anti-synergy. One of the best ways to scale Death's Oath is investing into Aura Effect. This doesn't really help your single target out much for things like Blight, things like Essence Drain. So between these two things, you have basically skills that should be paired well together are actually taking two different paths into what you have to spec into to scale them. So if you want to scale one well, you're not scaling the other one well. In other words, since I was noticing it was hard to scale Death's Oath damage in order to just clear maps well, which is what it should be good at, I had to invest a ton into this Aura Effect, which ended up meaning I didn't invest really well. I wasn't able to invest really well into my single target setup with my Chaos Dot skill. So at the end of the day, I could clear maps, but the second I got to the boss, the build sucked. And this has to compete with things like ED Contagion, which can do a decent amount of damage, and it can clear well. And Death's Oath, basically, in order for it to clear well, you have to not do good single target, which you don't sacrifice with a lot of other chaos damage over time skills. Along with these anti-synergies, these buffs to the chaos dot skills, while Death's Oath got no upgrades, you also have power creep, which basically makes Death's Oath bad by comparison. You have things like Herald stacking, Archmage abuse, Impale stacking, overpowered specters, etc. The list goes on and on. Basically, across the whole game, there's been a ton of things that have been buffed and buffed and buffed, while Death's Oath hasn't gotten really anything. The only time Death's Oath really got a buff was when they added Chaos Damage over Time Multiplier, which was nice. It kind of gave Death's Oath a little bit of a revival, but then the game kept buffing other things on top of that, and Death's Oath hasn't seen much love since. So basically, the graph kind of goes like this. As more time goes on, the game gets harder, there's more power creep where other skills get better, Death's Oath viability becomes worse and worse and worse. It just has this decline where you play Death's Oath and you think, I could be doing the game so much more efficiently if I just wasn't doing Death's Oath. I played Death's Oath just to see how it would work in the current meta. I invested extremely heavily into it with very kind of pathetic results, in all honesty. It was a ton of investment just to get Death's Oath to clear T16 maps, and it wasn't even that great of clear. I mean, you may have noticed that in the opening clip. I'm not sure or not if that was really displayed well. I forgot to have AoE in, so it was with conk effects, so the clear was even worse, but still, the reality is the damage is bad. My last point I'm going to make here is the cost of getting Death's Oath to clear T16 is a massive investment into aura, which is basically also a cost which costs you your single target. It makes it so the single target is going to be terrible. I'll explain this when I go into my gear and what I had to basically do to make Death's Oath clear. But the reality is, if you want Death's Oath to feel like okay in clearing T16 maps, you have to sacrifice speccing into a lot of your single target for Blight, for Essence Drain, whatever Chaos Dot you want to spec into. It now is just bad in terms of what it could be, because you have to spend so much investment to try to get Death's Oath to a point where it feels okay in maps, which that's what the whole point of running a Death's Oath build is, to have a fun build where you just run through the map and things just blow up from the Chaos Dot multi, or not the Chaos Dot multi, the Chaos damage over time. And at the end of the day, to get it to that point where it maybe even feels okay at clearing maps, you sacrifice a bunch of passives that could go into Blight, Essence Drain, another skill for your single target, as well as sacrificing a chest for a 6-link. So we're going to go into the game, we're going to go over my gear. That's basically the rundown of points I had as to why Death's Oath is just not worth building into in the current game. It's just going to feel bad in terms of its viability, and it's really going to be rather disappointing currently with how hard monsters are and what you need to scale Death's Oath for it to actually feel good for clearing. So let's get into the game. Let's go over the gear I used. If you're still curious about how much I invested in the character, or if you really want to try to make Death's Oath work and what I did, and maybe you can improve upon it. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, we're going to quickly go over how much I invested into this character in terms of gearing, and then we're going to go over the gem links as well as the passive tree and the cluster tools I used to scale Death's Oath. To start it off, we have a Death's Oath, obviously. Not much you can do about that. That's mandatory if you're going to play a Death's Oath build. Next up, we have basically a helmet, which we dense fossil span for high ES, also getting aspect of the spider on it because we had an open suffix, and we bought something with temporal chains curse effect because we thought it would feel good in maps if everything around us couldn't really move. And the reality is it did feel kind of tanky because stuff doesn't really hit us very fast in maps. But once you get to a boss, the boss has huge curse effect negation, and they don't feel that much slower, but it did make boss fights feel a little bit easier with a heavy investment into our temporal chains. For our boots, we grabbed a movement speed enchant boots, and then we just basically dense fossil spam this until we got 2 high ES rolls and then an open prefix so we could craft movement speed, and that's kind of what we ended up with here. With our amulet, we went for Solstice Vigil solely so we could have a decked out temp change without costing us reservation. You'll see we have it. We have temp chains, link to Awaken Blasphemy, link to Empower. We had an enhanced level 4. I forgot what I did with it. I don't know where it is. But that was basically to get a real high effect of our temporal chains on map monsters and map bosses. For our rings, we basically went for some attributes we needed for Death's Oath, as well as ES if you could get it, and a faster start to energy shield recharge, because we are a Wicked Ward type style build. So you see I'll have strength on both of these because Death's Oath is 180 strength and we have to hit that strength requirement. It's hard to do it all the way over on the witch side of the tree where strength is nowhere to be found really. So you have to get a lot of strength on gear. Next up for our gloves, we crafted high ES Chaos Dot multi overtime gloves. To do this you basically get a pair of hunter gloves with you craft it with dense and aberrant fossils until you get T1 Chaos Dot multi, and then basically another high ES roll. We got high flat increased ES with a hybrid ES mana roll, and then we crafted flat ES on it, and we had some fire res. These turned out fantastic. For our belt, you can see we basically grabbed a Crusader belt and we dense fossil spammed it until we hit increased ES, flat ES, ES recovery rate, and then we could craft another resist on it. And for our quiver, we basically bought a bunch of quivers with the T1 damage over time multiplier and an open suffix, I believe. Yeah, an open suffix, and then we filled up the prefixes, and then we slammed it with Hunter's Exalted Orbs. We got this in 3 Hunter's Exalts, I think, or maybe 4. And basically we were trying to hit T1 Chaos Dot Multi so we could have double Chaos Dot Multi over time. But we hit T2 and we were happy with that. We kept going. Very strong for Chaos Dot Multi builds is to go bow plus quiver. It's hard to beat the amount of Chaos Dot Multi you can get, along with having an additional place for a 6-link. For our bow, there's a ton of these on the server, but basically you want one that has plus level gems, damage over time multiplier, T1, and then crafted chaos damage over time multiplier. We bought this for like, I don't know, 7 to 10x, somewhere in that range. I kind of forget. But basically, this is a bow that would allow us to have a 6-link Essence Drain setup if we really wanted to have some sort of single target. And we could have done that and it would have been okay single target, but at the end of the day, with how heavily our tree is invested into Death South, I don't think it really would have felt that good considering how much we haven't really invested into Essence Drain or Blight or some really specific damage over time for that stuff. Instead, we have... Basically, this is our aura setup where we have a bunch of levels to our Enlighten, so that way we can fit in Flesh and Stone, Discipline, Summon Skitterbots, as well as Malevolence and Dread Banner. All these things fit in for some useful things, like Dread Banner gives us enemies have 21% less accuracy. It's straight up like better than Enfeeble's less accuracy because bosses can't negate it with their less curse effect. So it basically makes us a lot harder to hit, on top of having Flesh and Stone, which makes nearby enemies blind, along with Discipline to give us a lot of ES, along with Skitterbots to give enemies shock effect so we do more damage to them, as well as chill them. With all of our aura effect, our Skitterbots actually slowed bosses down more than our Temporal Chains did, which is stupid because we invested crazy into curse effect and high level temp chains and whatnot, and our Skitterbots did more because we invested a decent amount into aura effect for our Death South. Also, we have Malevolence just for some more damage over time multi for our Death South. Now let's go into gem links. For Death South, there's basically only one setup you can do for a 6-link, and it's kind of a pathetic 6-link at that. You have to use Arcane Surge. Basically, this makes it so Death South can be supported by less duration and Swift Affliction. It's kind of sad you have to do this, but the reality is you waste an entire link just so you can have like a suboptimal support of less duration. Less duration is a very bad 6th length, but you have to do it. That's the only thing you can use. Then we have an Awakened Void Manipulation. We have an Awakened Swift Affliction, 20 qualities. We have Conk Effect and Efficacy 20 quality. Conk Effect, you basically just swap this out for increased AoE when you're in a map versus when you're trying to do boss damage. Either way, the damage is still pretty bad. Next up, we have our Temp Change. Like I said, it was an Enhance, Empower, Awaken Blasphemy. Basically, all the things to try to level up Temp Chains and make it strong. And then for our Helmet setup, we have a double Curse with Enfeeble and Despair, basically to make it so bosses do less damage, and we also do a lot more damage to them. So we had some high effect Despair and Enfeeble going there, along with our Temporal Chains we were cursing people with. For our glove setup, we have multiple totem support, totem support, Withering Step, and Wither. This is basically we get to a boss, we drop the totems basically to get a bunch of Wither stacks to help our Death South damage out, as well as while we're mapping, we pop Withering Step, which applies a bunch of withers to all the enemies around us, makes it do more damage, and also helps getting the Wither stacks higher along on top of our bosses as well. So that's the gem link setup. That's the gear setup. The flasks are pretty simple. We went for a mana flask. You could use basically whatever here. You didn't have to use a mana flask. I just used it because I had Enduring Freeze and I needed freeze immunity. Next up, you want Witchfire Brew while you're running through a map. That allows you to apply Despair, which means you'll have Temporal Chains and Despair being procced on enemies, which allows for more Chaos Explosions, as well as it helps your damage over time, helps you run through monsters faster. Then we have a Jade Flask, because we already have some investment into making enemies miss us, as well as some evasion. So Jade Flask is nice to make enemies miss us more while they are also being slowed. Onslaught to help for movement speed and get some bleed immunity, and Quicksilver for just movement speed. Now, let's go over the passive tree. You'll notice this is, I don't know if it's pseudo-standard for Death South build. Most Death South build, you see them grab these aura effect nodes, like here, here, and here. Normally that's pretty common. It's also pretty common for them to go over to Charisma and this Chaos style multi, which along the way they'd grab other Chaos damage over time effects, like this stuff here. There's a decent amount of stuff that you'd normally be able to grab that would scale both Death South as well as your single target setup, which would be your Blight or your Essence Drain, etc. But because Death's Oath is so bad with the current monster HP and whatnot, I had to invest really heavily into Aura Effect and the Cluster Jewels to make it feel okay while running a T16 map. So you'll see here on the Cluster Jewels we have nothing but Aura Effect all the way around. Here, 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 here. Which ends up making us somewhat a little bit of an Aura bot, because we have basically on all these nodes we have 10 plus 15 plus another 6. So it's 21, 21, 27, and then like another 27 here. You know, that's pretty close to 100 Aura Effect all the way all over here just to get Death's Oath to a point where it felt okay. And on top of that we have damage over time multiplier while affected by Malevolence. So we have a decent Watcher's Eye on top of that. All this investment solely to get Death's Oath to a point where it feels okay while mapping, which means our single target really is starting to fall behind other Chaos builds. You'll notice for our large jewels, we went for Wicked Paw, Touch of Cruelty, Unholy Grace. This is all basically just Chaos damage stuff. Unholy Grace, Touch of Cruelty, Unwavering Evil. All a bunch of Chaos generic Chaos damage scaling as well. And we grabbed the Chaos Dot wheels here and here, as well as Curse Effect here. And we anointed Charisma to fit all of our auras in, as well as get more Aura Effect. So that kind of breaks down the tree. We grabbed ES here, Energy Shield here, Energy Shield here, Energy Shield here. All the major Energy Shield wheels, as well as Wicked Ward. That breaks down kind of the tree of what we had to spec into to get Death's Oath to be somewhat viable feeling. And then we went to Cultist with the Chaos Wheel and the Curse Wheel to basically get some high-level curses, some additional curses, as well as Chaos damage scaling. Now let's look over Pantheon. Okay, that's right. We didn't really mess around with Pantheon. We basically grabbed Stun Immunity and the Bleed thing. We clearly didn't look at it too much, so it didn't really matter at the end of the day. The build basically, it felt okay while mapping, and then the second you get into a boss fight, the single target's horrible. If I really wanted to, I could have gone for a 6-link damage setup here with the Chaos skill, but I still believe it would have felt pretty bad because of how heavily we invested into things that weren't actually Essence Drain, that weren't Blight, that weren't something that we'd actually use for a single target. If you make the character, though, that's what I'd recommend. Going for a 6-link damage setup here, and maybe it would feel okay. I'm going to leave you guys with, basically, we killed Uber Elder with Death's Oath, which was a lot of work. We basically did 3 attempts. We bricked 2 sets, and then we got it on the 3rd attempt, I believe. And that's the character. If you really are curious to build it, I wouldn't recommend it, but you're a free person. You can do what you want. Alright, here's the Uber Elder kill. You guys have a good one. Wait, okay, sorry, I stopped watching because I was so confused how that thing spawned there.
Exile, do something.
Okay, I gotta shave her down. Gotta be faster on that freeze flask. Oh dear. Okay. Alright, we got a phase. Okay, don't drop, don't drop, don't drop. Okay, good. No.
I need more mana.
Oh, if I didn't freeze there. If I didn't freeze Flask there, I was so dead. 100% I was dead.
Embrace my misery. Gaze to the abyss.
I'm going in.
Embrace my misery.
Crap. Is there a, There's not. Okay, I was just checking. Yeah, he's doing this stupid freeze stuff. I'm gonna try to manage the balls.
Gaze to the abyss. Gaze to the abyss. A power from the vault.
I need more mana.
Oh, I was trying to dash to the edge. Oh crap! I should have respawned right away. Now that. Come here, Squid. Come here. He's dead. Okay. I don't care about killing new Uber. I'll do a default attack.
Gaze to the abyss. Gaze to the abyss.
No, no. Alright, last phase. Time to not throw the game.
Embrace my misery.
slowed. Okay, I got Uber Elder down. Or I got Shaper down. Come on, just die already. Just die. You're dead. That's what we're talking about. And we got a 7x sale. That's why you don't go into D&D mode when you're trying to kill Uber Elder. Give me my spoils.